Hello, it's good to see, well, I guess I can't see you, but you can see me. We're going to start simple today and hopefully bring you the Word, and we will build from here as we move along. Welcome to my home. The Holy Gospel according to John. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. And then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some of them were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." And he kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And when I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, and then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who has sinned perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." And he said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and he had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, whom you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" And his parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah will be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been born blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." And he answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." And they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And he answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but it was for this man. We do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to the one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." And they answered him, "You were born entirely in sin, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had been driving him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." And Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." And he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who see may be blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." The gospel of the Lord. Let us pray. God of amazing grace, may these words and all of our meditations today draw us closer to you. Amen. So I don't really know what to say, other than it seems like a lifetime since we were together, and not simply since last week. I usually start my sermons with something light, maybe even a little funny. But at least for right now, all I can think about is how much I miss you. Last Sunday, I made a commitment that to keep my sermons as normal as possible. And so I'm going to get right into the text. And it certainly was a long one. You probably had time to go make yourself a cup of coffee or cook breakfast before I finished reading all of what we read today. This is actually one of the longest and most detailed accounts of healing in the New Testament. And it all begins when Jesus and his disciples, they're walking through town and they encounter a man who was born blind. And the disciples, they ask this question: whose fault is this? The blind man's sins or the sins of his parents? And their question, it actually reflects the understanding, a common understanding of the day. If the body was somehow not perfect, it was a mark of sin. And it made the person ritually unclean. These two choices also reflect the worldview of the dominant religious groups of the day, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Both groups had strong opinions on these things. And it seems like the disciples, they think, hey, maybe this is the perfect time to find out who is right. So here they are, they're following Jesus, and they've got their notebooks ready, and then Jesus tells them it's neither. I'm sure a few of them thought, well, here we go again. Jesus says sin is not a part of this. And this particular blind man has crossed their path so that they can be made to see. So now watch what God can do. Now, the disciples are not looking to help this man. They only want to discuss his lot in life. They also weren't expecting anything to happen. I'm pretty sure that the blind man isn't expecting anything to happen either. He doesn't say, Jesus, have mercy on me, heal me. No, in fact, he probably doesn't even know Jesus is there. Yeah, the blind man, he's sitting there on the side of the road, begging, and some guy comes up, spits in the dirt next to him, and then rubs all of this goop right into his eyes. And he's probably like, oh, gross. And Jesus, of course, he doesn't do this move to be gross. He's also not mixing up some kind of magical potion. Jesus, we know that Jesus is perfectly capable of speaking a word of healing. We have examples like, pick up your mat and walk, or your faith has made you well. By mixing up this mud, Jesus adds to the controversy of this healing, because mixing mud, that's work. And work on the Sabbath, not cool. Jesus then tells the man to go wash. And now he can see. When his eyes were opened, God's light came pouring out from the man who had once been blind. See, today we know that vision happens when light is absorbed and reflected and bouncing around inside our retinas. But in the first century, they thought vision came from within. It reached out and understood the world and then brought information back. Light came from within and it demonstrated God's presence. Jesus doesn't simply heal the man's physical blindness. He rekindles the man's inner light. The poor, blind beggar is now ablaze with the light of God. I get the sense that the man is probably in a bit of shock, total disbelief himself. He's not running through the streets shouting praises of amazing grace. I once was blind, but now I see. He's seeing the world for the very first time. Seeing his neighbors for the very first time. And his neighbors are like, is that the guy that sits there and begs? No, that can't be the blind guy. And then they go to him. Are you the guy? Are you? Now, how could this happen? They don't seem to be interested in the former blind man himself. Rather than helping him out, trying to figure out where everything is, they think, well, maybe the Pharisees should be handling all of this. So they take him to the Pharisees. The man, he's still in shock, seeing the world for the very first time. It may be the best moment of his life. And rather than getting to celebrate, he's being questioned now by religious leaders. But they actually don't seem too interested in the fact that he can now see either. They're more interested in the sin. What happened with the sin? And then he gets to see his parents for the first time ever. And rather than welcoming them with open arms and rejoicing, even they seem ambivalent and really actually concerned with their own needs. And so this is how it goes. Everything is new for him. Yet throughout the story, the one who now sees is not being seen. This even shows up in how he's referred to. Even now, we usually call this lesson as the man who was born blind. He never gets a name. He's the man who used to beg, or the man who formerly had been blind, or simply the blind man. It's like everyone he encounters refuses to accept his transformation. They refuse to see this new light. And instead, he is still defined by who he used to be and the previous circumstances of his life. And for the blind man in our story, it's a huge transformation. And they either refuse to see it, or they treat it like it's no big deal, or they try to figure out what's sinful about it, or they simply can't get their heads around the change. And there's something about this. I mean, this isn't merely a message for those people 2,000 years ago. I think as people in general, as humanity, we have a difficult time accepting change in others and even in ourselves. In the days and weeks to come, it will be easy to see people as we saw them even a few weeks ago. And I'm talking specifically about the opinions we have formed about one another, especially as a society in the last 10 years. You know, the divisions have run so deep. And really, these are deeply held opinions about who our neighbor is. If our lesson today teaches us anything, it is to be open to the possibility that people we once thought we could never be in relationship with are being as transformed by this new reality as we are. And let's face it, our world right now, our lives right now are very different than they were even a week ago. It makes me wonder, how new and different the life of the blind man today. For him, when everything suddenly changed, how did he look forward to his future? What challenges did he face? That one who was once blind, but now he sees. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's new. He's seeing the world for the first time. And his future is completely transformed. But it's not without struggle. His community doesn't embrace him. His family is pushing him out. The religious leaders are throwing around accusations. He can no longer do the job that the only job he's ever known. And yet, despite all of the challenges that are facing him, I think he is looking to the future and putting the past where it belongs. We see this when he speaks with the Pharisees. He's not acting like the blind beggar when he says, I do not know if he's a sinner. One thing I do know, that I was blind and now I see. Or when he says, well, here's an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. Or, do you want to become his disciples? No, he is speaking as a person of authority. And when he sees Jesus again, his response to Jesus is, Lord, I believe. This new light is reaching out from within. His past is the past. And like the woman at the well that we met last week, his past does not define who he is today. It does not determine his future. Our story this week invites us to see with new eyes, to see the transforming world, that the transforming word that was with that is with us as a source of creation from the very beginning. To see the many ways Christ enters our life and frees us from whatever holds us back. The past, of course it matters. This isn't about forgetting. We have triumphs and sorrows, joys and scars. We carry it forward with us. And at times, using it to give us strength and courage for the next thing. But it is still the past. The past matters, but it is the past. The cross of Christ, it reminds us that the hurts and the sorrows and the mistakes and the regrets that have marked us, they might describe us, but they cannot define us. They can describe us like the one who had been born blind. But again, they do not define us. And they do not define our neighbor. We are defined by God's love. We are God's beloved children. You are a beloved child of God. And Christ assures us that God's love is more powerful than our tragedies, more powerful than our fear. Christ's love gives us new light from within, and it assures us that the future is in the hands of the very source of creation. Our future, your future, is light in the heart of God. Amen.